References for criteria and credits related to reserve pumpers are shown here. The formula for determining credit for reserve pumpers is pretty basic. The total value for all existing reserve pumpers is divided by the total possible value of the needed reserve pumpers. Then this percentage is multiplied by 0.5 to give the overall credit earned. Keep in mind that the number of existing reserve pumpers can never be higher than the number needed. Let's take a look now at how the two component parts of this formula are derived. The first element in the formula is the credit for existing reserve pumpers as shown here in red in the formula on the right. As with in-service pumpers, this value is a function of the pump capacity factor, the hose carried factor, and a carried equipment factor. Less than full credit is earned if the pump capacity is less than 1000 GPM, if the total supply and larger attack hose is less than 1200 feet, if the pumper is not fully equipped, or if the hose and pump are not properly tested with those tests documented. The second factor affecting credit for reserve pumpers is the number of needed reserves. The ratio for determining how many reserves are needed is 1 reserve for every 8 in-service pumpers that are needed, or fraction thereof. Do not confuse this with how many in-service pumpers there actually are. For this formula, we're concerned with how many are needed. You will recall from the presentation about engine companies that the number needed is the higher of the three factors. The number needed by basic fire flow, the number of fire stations housing pumpers that were used during the graded year, or the number needed based on the fire department's methods of operations. Let's look at 3 examples. In the first example, the graded area needs between 1 and 8 engine companies. Applying the 1:8 ratio results in this area needing 1 reserve pumper. In the second example, the graded area needs between 9 and 16 engine companies. This area would need 2 reserve pumpers. In the final example, the graded area needs between 17 and 24 engine companies. This area would need 3 reserve pumpers. Areas needing more than 24 in-service pumpers would need more reserve pumpers as determined by using the 1:8 ratio. There's good news for areas that don't have a reserve pumper. Believe it or not, multiple graded areas can share 1 or more reserve pumpers. But as with most things in life, there are some rules that must be understood. First of all, there must be a formal written agreement signed by all involved parties that defines the sharing arrangement. Second, the total number of reserve pumpers is based on the total number of in-service pumpers needed by all areas involved in the arrangement. The same 1:8 ratio is applied to determine how many are needed. Let's look at a couple of examples. In the first example, 2 departments wish to share a reserve pumper. Each department needs 4 in-service engines. Therefore, there are a total of 8 in-service engines needed between them. In applying the 1:8 ratio, 1 reserve pumper is needed. Because 1 reserve is needed and the 2 departments are sharing a single fully equipped reserve, both departments would earn full 0.5 point credit for the reserve pumper. In example 2, 2 departments wish to share a reserve pumper. Department A needs 5 in-service engines and Department B needs 4 in-service engines. Now between them, a total of 9 in-service engines are needed. Applying the 1:8 ratio, 2 reserve pumpers are now needed. Credits earned by each department are the same, but there's something else you need to know. Sharing a reserve pumper sounds good on the surface, and in fact, it can be a good thing for all departments involved. But let's take another look at example 2 and imagine what could go wrong. Think about this. Each department individually needs only 1 reserve pumper, but together they need 2. With the sharing arrangement in place, the need for 2 reserves then applies to both departments. So what are the implications of the sharing arrangement? To answer that, let's look at the math. Prior to entering into the agreement, Department A was in great shape with 1 existing fully equipped reserve compared to 1 needed reserve. They earned the maximum 0.5 points credit available for reserve pumpers. Department B, on the other hand, earned no credit for reserve pumpers because they did not have one. After entering into the agreement, things changed. Department A lost credit because there were now two needed reserves and they only had the one. However, Department B now had access to a reserve, and even though two were needed, they at least received some credit for the one that was being shared. Let's take a side-by-side look at the credits available and earned under the two examples I've presented. With example 1, only one reserve was needed after entering into the agreement, and you can see that Department B benefited from the agreement, and Department A's credit remained the same. However, with example 2, where two reserves were needed, we see that both departments still end up with the same credit, but Department A suffers. The moral of this story is to be careful what you ask for. It wouldn't make sense to enter into a sharing arrangement that would require more reserves than are available to share. Finally, my two examples each involved two departments entering into an agreement to share a reserve. There is no limit to the number of departments that may be involved. But remember that as the number of departments that are participating goes up, so may the number of needed reserves. This concludes my presentation related to credit for reserve pumpers. As always, we at the Property Insurance Association hope this information has been useful to you. If you should have questions about this presentation or any other rating-related topic, please do not hesitate to call. In closing, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you have a great day.